I am Tim Hugging, and this is Politely Atheist. I'm discussing Mormonism, and I'm with, I'm sorry, I have trouble saying your name, Capacitance?
Capacitance.
Capacitus. I like that. We'll probably have a few people coming in, but basically we're just discussing Mormonism and just general questions that people have. And I was just talking with you about how your girlfriend recently converted to the church, and you made a point saying how how they appear to be just a traditional Judeo-Christian religion. And, to be honest with you, they're a little different. For instance, the way that they view God is very interesting. Are you aware of the term infinite regress?
Not exactly, but I mean, I had a friend when I was a teenager that was, he kind of explained some of the Mormonism stuff to me and about how you sort of end up on par with God or a God at some point.
Yeah. So basically, the way that the church looks at everything, and just to be slightly crude, it's almost as if it's like a pyramid scheme. Not the like, because they kind of existed before that, but more or less, you have to work up to get to that point. And a lot of members nowadays will kind of make the assumption that God the Father, who's called Elohim, is one step ahead of Jesus, who is Jehovah. And these are beliefs that a lot of even members don't really know or like to talk about, to be honest with you. And basically, the way that they look at everything is, and they really do not advertise this. This is stuff that you would have to be in the church for a while before you get this information. But basically, they look at Jesus as if he was God the Father on the planet Earth. So every time you pray to Jesus. And Jesus is the literal son of Elohim, who rules over another planet called Kolob. And basically, the way that they teach everything is that you could be just like Jesus. You're the spirit child of Jesus, and eventually you can inherit a world or a universe or whatever modern day interpretation the church has on your own planet when you die and you go to the celestial kingdom. And it's a little unique because most religions will more or less claim to be only believe in God. They'll talk about the Trinity, or they'll talk about this, but the Trinity is basically just a single God, right? I mean, the way that most Christians phrase it, right?
Yeah.
But Mormons are polytheistic. They believe in multiple gods. They may not worship multiple gods, but they believe in multiple gods. And that's a little strange.
Well, I guess it makes it easier to accept the idea that you'll end up a god at some point.
Yeah, it really is. But and I talk to a lot of members, and they get really upset if you say, "Oh, I don't think you're a traditional Christian," and I say, "Well, you're not a traditional anything. The way that you believe the way that you believe in God and gods, and and for instance, Mormons are one of the few Judeo-Christian religions that believe in a goddess. They believe Elohim had a wife, Heavenly Mother, and they That's a
Just to
tough
be
pill
clear,
for a lot of Christians to swallow, right?
is it just one wife?
What's that?
Just one wife, out of curiosity?
Uh, well, okay, so that's one of the more confusing things about Mormonism. So when you die, your body dies, and your spirit goes to a place they'll call spirit prison or spirit paradise. So basically, if you're a good person, you go to spirit prison, and if you're a bad person, you go to spirit paradise. And basically, all the souls will kind of chill in that area until Jesus comes again, and then you'll be judged, and then you can either become a god or go to hell or whatever. Um, so basically, what Mormons infer is that this process has been going on for a long time, multiple times. So what's going on here on Earth is not unique, and is probably taken place in other universes or something. But they don't really delve too deep into that. Because it really does get confusing.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, not to get too off topic, but yeah, it does get really confusing, and from what I gather, it's a modern religion making sense of an 18th century. I don't want to call him a con artist, but he was fast and loose with a lot of what he believed. Joseph Smith.
So why
Uh,
not make the or why stop short of the con artist thing?
well, there is some feeling that he may have genuinely believed in some of the things that were taking place that in his life. I kind of felt like that grandiose sense of self may have led to a feeling that maybe he was visited by God or angels, or there was a lot of crazy things that he claimed, and at some point you're like, you know a con artist usually just wants money. Like uh, a person on his level, it's almost like he's a modern day Muhammad. He really did believe. It seemed like at some point, maybe early on, he was a con artist, but later on, I felt like he really believed in the stuff he was selling.
See, the way
And
that I look at both of the idea of Muhammad or uh, Mr. Smith is that they probably both started out as con artists and then became prisoners of the character or prisoners to their own story because they got addicted to the following.
yeah,
And so I don't know that would uh, provide any type of recompense for the being the con artist part. I think that there's still that, even though they may truly even believe their own lies at some point.
yeah, I would agree with that to a great extent. And I kind of felt like times where his wife and his family members, who were infinitely involved in everything, were kind of giving him a little kick in of reality. Emma Smith, his wife, at one point, when he introduced the doctrine of polygamy, for instance, like at one point she was just like, how can you do this? It's like, this, you're just some basic, barely literate man, and you feel like you can introduce a doctrine that null and voids our marriage, basically. But even she at some point really believed in some of the doctrine, but she's a very interesting person, actually. Like she was a part of the reorganization of the church. So a lot of Mormons, when Joseph Smith died, went west to Utah, and there was actually a sizable portion of members who decided to stay in the area where they were, which was around Independence, Missouri. And she decided to start her own religion and basically cut out the polygamy part altogether. And a lot of the things that the Mormons believed altogether. But yeah, that's a different thing. But yeah, I would say, you know, despite what he may have believed, he was a con artist. But he was in my opinion, he was a con artist on the same level of like a prophet. And, you know, looking at everything from an atheist perspective, I'm just, you know, my mind just thinks that they're just full of it. You know, it's like, how could they possibly believe this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But I mean, it's really tough. You know, like, I think once you get deep enough in it, you know, and you have people swearing that you know, that they were a part of all these spiritual events, and you know that God the Father and His Son actually spoke to you at some, and everybody has to kind of back up your story. Eventually, you're just kind of like, well, I guess it happened.
Right. So that brings me to the next question: is at what point do you differentiate between a cult and a religion?
Well, you know, I've heard a lot of quotes, and a lot of people will say cults typically are smaller and they don't succeed, and religions have mainstream following. But you know, that's an excellent point, because the Mormons did believe in a lot of very disturbing things. You know, they were polygamist up until 1870. They believed in
Well, they still are in northern Arizona.
well, yeah, some of the more what's the word, hardcore members.
Oh, the
ones that
you mean the
the ones that believe in Joseph Smith.
All right. I thought you were talking about the FLDS, the ones in Colorado City.
Well, see, that's the thing, is they're all over the place, and to be honest with you, it's really hard. And I hear it from Mormons all the time. Oh, they're not real Mormons. You know, and I'm like, well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, that sounds an awful
Like
lot like they're not real Christians, or they're not real Muslims, or they're not real.
Yeah. And I say, well, if you look at everything that Joseph Smith believed, it seems like they were pretty true to what everything that he practiced and pushed forward, you know, by revelation or whatever. And I would say, you know, some of the more controversial things that they believed, you know, for instance, I don't know if you guys have heard of blood atonement. Have you ever heard of that concept?
I've heard of it as blood feuds, but it's where basically they believe that you need to.
It's the shedding of blood for the remission of sins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
No, you're fine. And I thank you for bringing that up, because that would involve either
Human
cutting
or animal
someone's
sacrifice.
wrist in the temple, or killing the person in the temple so that they could be free of sin. And that was something that really freaked out some of the early day you know, people in the 1800s. You know, I think Mark Twain wrote about it and said, wow, these people are crazy.
Human sacrifice, man.
Yeah.
Man, I want to make a government comment so bad right now.
Jay the anti-status robot.
Yeah.
Well, I still think it brings
this,
you back to the whole idea that it's a very large and successful cult.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, it's very difficult to differentiate. You know, it's like if the Catholic Church today was doing some of the same things that they did 2,000 years ago, I mean, would you still call them a cult? You know, because they might still be sacrificing animals. They still
Well,
might.
no. The Catholic Church didn't do the sacrificing of the animals, but the Catholic Church did other fucking things that were like that. I don't know how deep you want to go.
Just briefly, please.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about the Jews. Like, if you look about now, that's if you believe the Bible on this account, and if you believe the non-Christian Jews who wrote about this event. It's because it's even in Jewish literature that at the time Jesus was crucified, right? Typically, you let out one goat into the desert, and you killed one goat in the temple or just outside the city gates, blah blah, at Golgotha, and then you sent the other goat out to the wilderness, and it got tossed off a cliff, and the red cloth that was wrapped around its horns after it got thrown up. By the time it got thrown off a cliff, from the time it hit from whatever. By the time it hit the ground, the red cloth turned white. Well, that no longer worked after Jesus was crucified. Now, the Jews don't say, "Oh, Jesus, whatever," but they do make note of, "Hey, the cloth is not changing color like it used to," and so you could think what you want, but they still recorded it. So there is, that whole not killing people to appease the gods thing. That was why Abram was challenged by God. I know atheists don't look at it that way, but that's the way the Jews look at it. It was like, because Abraham was so dedicated, he was like, "Oh, I'll kill your kid," and he was like, "Yes, sir, God, I'll kill my kid." And God was like, "Hey, dummy, no, don't do that shit. Kill a goat instead."
Let's keep it kind of PG too, James.
Okay,
I
sorry.
don't mean to cut you off, buddy.
No, sorry. You know how I get. I get all excited.
The point I'm trying to make is the cult label. I feel like everything that they believe today, it'd be very difficult to consider them a cult, considering that they don't believe in a lot of some of the stranger doctrines that they used to. And to be honest with you, they could really just change some of their core beliefs just within one prophecy, because Mormons believe in modern day prophecy. The entire most Christian religions believe that the last prophet was, I believe, John the Baptist or Jesus or something like that.
It was Jesus.
Well, okay.
I don't think John the Baptist was actually considered a prophet, was he?
I'm not sure.
No, I think he was just an author.
Well, it's all partially correct, but I don't think you want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't. Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
The point that I'm saying,
especially because we're on the topic of Mormonism, particularly.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's related sort of, because some people of the Christian denominations believe that prophetic word can always be given and it never went away. And so the Mormons are very similar in that viewpoint. Now, that's not a widely held belief among AKA Christians.
Yeah, Trinitarians.
But I have a charismatic grandmother, well, adoptive grandmother. She adopted my mother. She was considered a prophet in her community.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was basically said that she could prophesize, that she spoke with the authority of God.
So,
those are two different things, though. Those are
Mormon's opinion that their current day prophet and president is an actual prophet, just like Ezekiel or
Well, isn't that
that's one of the main reasons why it's really hard. You can point out some disturbing things that they've done in the past, but I mean, all they have to do is say, well, that was a previous guy, and we believe in different things now.
Wasn't there a point where the and some of the FLDS believe, the fundamentalists believe this still, where it had been said that every man could actually prophesize who was a woman, and then Joseph Smith or Brigham Young changed that because it decentralized the power structure of the church.
Well, see, the Mormons had kind of I would say a right-left split. It was a left split when the church left to Utah. Some of the more conservative members went with Brigham Young, and the rest stayed to form the reorganized church, which is now called the Community of Christ. And the next split that took place is when they outlawed polygamy and blood atonements.
And that's where the FLDS comes in. The people who populate Colorado City and the crazies that live in some parts of Utah.
Yeah, like there's a big community in Salt Lake. I mean, in St. George, and they're in Nevada. They're in Mexico. They're
Mexico. There's one town in Canada. The reason I know this is because I read John Krakauer's Under the Banner of Heaven, which I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, I can't imagine they'd want to give up their variety.
Because it's essentially an indictment against the Mormon faith and faith in general, because Krakauer's kind of a dick. But
well, that's okay. This is the kind of thing. Like, this is something I've noticed by people who leave a group or organization or faith. It doesn't not just pertain to Mormons. It's pertaining to any group that you used to belong to. Once you leave it, you become like a super asshole to people like that group. Most of the time, there's some people who leave it who just like, whatever. They don't actively seek to I don't actively seek to destroy it. I tried to catch it. I tried to catch it.
No, it's okay.
What I mean? It's like some people like grew up Catholic, but they leave Catholicism, but they don't actively try to go and destroy Catholicism. You know what I mean?
I know a lot of people who left the Catholic Church only to badmouth it.
No, exactly. That's kind of what I'm saying. Well, it typically happens in the more authoritarian, whatever your faith is, or whatever your group is. I saw this. I see the same thing with some people who left atheism, or who left the military, or who left whatever. They're hypercritical to the point of they just want to destroy the whole thing.
There's a bitterness.
Like
there's a bitterness
or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bitterness. Now, some people I know, like let me use Red for example. Red's not a Christian. Red's an atheist, but he's not trying to like openly go and just tear out, destroy Christians. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It comes out a little bit at a time. His kind of chop, but it's not like some other people who were like, oh, I left Buddhism, and then they just scream Buddhism's a cult the whole time, whether it is or not. You know what I mean?
I think time kind of heals those wounds, though. I mean, when I left the church, I was very upset. I felt like I was lied to my whole life. I felt like, well, why weren't they telling me the truth? Why weren't they telling me all these, controversial doctrines and all that kind of stuff?
Right.
And then, when you get older, you learn about other religions.
Sorry.
At least you guys.
Sorry, that was me.
It just kind of feels like you start to realize that most religions or organizations, have kind of a dark side, and and it's really not unique to something. So I've had people say, I typically find ex-Mormons become atheists, and I don't really understand that way of thinking. I'm like, maybe a few do, but a lot of them become Christians, like a lot of them will just be lapsed Mormons, and they don't really care.
Well, it's the same thing for like a lot of ex-Muslims. It's kind of split. Like if they come to a pseudo-Christian or Christian denomination, they go Catholic, which is it's similar, in kind of structure. But then the ones that go, there's some that go full atheist. But I've seen the same thing. I mean, it's not just indicative of. I've seen the same thing with military guys too. Some military guys, because of whatever reason, I'm not going to rip. Even though I'm an anarchist, I'm not going to totally rip on military guys like some people will. I do get their point of view, all that stuff, and I understand it. I have that reservation of saying, yeah, but these are the guys who kept me alive. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm extra leery. You know, it's the same thing for like, I'm not going to badmouth my parents. You know, kind of thing, and they're Catholics, so even though I can't stand Catholic Church.
So before I
we're getting a little off topic though. So
I have
I have a question about the you mentioned the Masonic rituals. Would you be interested in? Would you be okay with talking about that?
yeah, so some of the Masonic rituals, and I'll just discuss on the hangout. I because everybody keeps telling me how litigious the church is, and it's usually pertaining to the church rituals, the temple rituals, anyways, because they're supposed to be confidential. And so one of the things that that Mormons don't really discuss is that Joseph Smith was an active member of the Freemasons, and I'm not one of those conspiracy theorists. Even churches will admit it.
Yeah. You're not going to claim he's a Rosicrucian, Illuminist, Rothschild,
the cookie,
lizard man.
Yeah, but so some of the and this is from what I can gather is Joseph Smith really wanted to renew the temple, like the old Jewish temple. That's what he wanted to do, and he wanted to bring in the whole.
Hello?
Yeah, are you still there?
Yeah.
Tim
just cut out.
Fuck.
quick while he's gone. Curse.
Oh, is he not allowing cursing?
Yeah, he said.
Well, he doesn't. I'm assuming he doesn't want it. I mean, I tried to. Are you back?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
so he
sorry
wanted
about
to renew. He wanted to renew the temple, the old Jewish temple.
Yeah, and from what I could gather is he just didn't know what to do in the temple when you were there, and so he wanted to keep it kind of a sacred thing. And I felt like maybe he joined the Masons. Hey, see you later, man. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah. Nice meeting you, man.
Basically, the Masons had a lot of, Christian-esque rituals, some other rituals that are a little different. But one of the things that they really loved was the Adam and Eve story, and they would, Masons would act out the Adam and Eve story. They would, go over how it pertained to how the how life started, humanity started, and all that kind of stuff. And they would dress up. They would do secret handshakes.
They were fascinated with the fall of man.
Yeah.
Too right.
Yeah.
I think certain Masonic symbols actually use snakes as a symbol of knowledge.
Well, there's actually a book. I heard about it once, and they were talking about what some of the symbols that AKA the Masons used and their original meaning, and a lot of the meanings that they put in there aren't necessarily what we put in there. I'm not saying they're not all like woo.
No.
I'm just it was like the statue. I was talking about the statue the other day about how there was a statue of Moses holding the Ten Commandments, and it had horns on its head. Well, back then,
that's that's a traditional symbol.
It's what?
That's a traditional symbol of strength and authority.
Yeah. In other cultures, but like, not to come to Joseph Smith's defense, but becoming a Mason was a pretty common thing back in the day, back in fraternal orders, because a lot of people did that for business connections and other things.
Oh yeah, my adoptive grandfather, the one who was married to the prophet, was actually a Freemason, and apparently she ragged on that and hated the fact that his gravestone had the symbol on it.
Yeah,
she hated that, and she's going to be buried right next to him.
The whole the compass and the compass and the square.
It's mainly about a lot of the stories and the handshakes, and it's kind of like what you said, Jay. It was making business relations with a lot of wealthy people, because there was a lot of wealthy people funding Joseph Smith at the time. He was trying to get some more gullible people to fund his, brand new cities that he was building. He wanted to build a giant temple, the Nabu Temple, which was a very large building for its time, around that area. And and he basically found the people he needed to find.
Are you talking about
in the
before or after? You're talking about before they took off to Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Because I know.
So yeah, and to be honest with you, it would be a very interesting what if with the church if Joseph Smith wasn't killed in the jail. What would the church be like right now?
I do think that the church would be it would be a very different religion.
Yeah.
Because Brigham Young kind of militarized it.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Well, but I mean, again, not to come to his defense, but that's a natural reaction to the local populace saying, "No, we don't want you here."
Yeah, exactly. To be fair,
yeah,
it was in some ways necessary to become militant, but
yeah. I mean, I don't agree with him, but I do understand what was going. I mean, if the federal government was just summoned in to destroy one of your AKA sacred buildings, you're going to have that paranoia of like, okay, well, who's going to try to kill us next? We better arm up.
Yeah.
And so, God, I had another question. So, do you think Joseph Smith was just a straight up con man, or do you think there was some aspect of belief in what he did?
No, I discussed this with his name is so hard to remember.
The can guy.
Yeah, but I mean, he brought it up just like you did, and I kind of felt like at some point I felt like he was early on. He definitely was. He was getting a lot of money. He was banging a lot of chicks. He's having a good time.
He was a water dowser at one point in his youth. And in point of fact, the church tends to portray him as a young man discovering those plates rather than a man in his 40s, which is about the time when he actually did it.
Yeah, and he did. And what he actually was doing, and in his youth, he would find quote unquote treasures for people around upstate New York, and he actually went to the jail, and I mean he actually went to the court, and the judge was basically like, "You little rascal, you don't do that again."
Yeah, he was basically a water dowser. He's one of those people that.
But see, the interesting thing about that though is, even when he was doing the water dousing, he claimed he was finding the treasures based on his 2 seer stones. And what he would do is he would have a top hat, and he would look inside the top hat, and the seer stones would show him the treasure. And lo and behold, he uses the same story to say how he translated the Book of Mormon.
See, I didn't know that part. I didn't know about that he was using the stones ahead of time. But what I think is very interesting about Mormonism, just kind of, I'm going to make a blanket statement, right? I don't think all Mormons are evil people or any of that mess, okay? Because you have to put that in there, right? But sure. I notice from a lot of religions and studying a lot of them, they all have like that very small kernel of truth, but most people don't want to just accept that kernel of truth. So you have to put on a big theatrical show to kind of present that kernel of truth. And I notice that in the field that I'm going in a lot. This is why a lot of like really political people write science fiction, because that way they can get away with it without being persecuted. I mean, I know it sounds kind of, again, that's not a slam against Mormons. I'm just saying this is what I've noticed a lot about any of these any group. I mean, I've seen it with atheists too. I've seen it with a lot of different people that have to put on this big show to try to put on this kernel of truth. You know, like, hey, don't steal, don't murder, or whatever your kernel of truth is. It's got to turn into this big magical production, and it's just like,
Well,
I don't know why that is though.
Well, I mean, that's probably a question for a different discussion. But going back to Joseph Smith and how he viewed himself, there was a sense of reality with him, and I felt like he was something else. And Brigham Young, I felt like was watching him very closely and was waiting at the right moment to kind of take control of things because he really wanted the church really bad, and he had some major qualms with how Joseph Smith viewed things. Mainly was what you guys mentioned before, how he viewed. He was a little bit more passive. He wasn't passive, but he was a little bit more passive than Brigham Young. And Brigham Young felt like they had a great opportunity because in his mind they had this religion that could almost span. I shouldn't say span. Could be almost like a nationality. Like you're a Mormon the same way that you're Polish, and he kind of was looking at everything that was going on with Texas and California, and noticed how Americans were moving to these areas and pretty much controlling things. And he felt, hey, this is the best time I can do to basically not only be a prophet, I could also be a governor. I could be not just a governor, a president. I could have my own nation. And it was very interesting because when they first moved to Utah, which they called Deseret, they were actually developing their own written language. They were they were working on certain new words. They're working on an actual spoken language, and they were actually, with missionaries, they were actively trying to get people to move to Utah, almost to rival the power of the United States in a lot of ways. Obviously, didn't get enough people to do so, but it seemed like in their minds they were like the Jews, forming a new Israel.
They wanted to build an empire of sorts, a kingdom.
Yeah, and it was very interesting to me looking at everything, because the mindset was like, we are the new Jews, and if you talk to Mormons, that mindset is very apparent. Like whenever you get they have these blessings called patriarchal blessings, and they'll tell you which tribe of Israel you are, because in Mormon ideology, we're all scattered tribes of Israel. So people in Asia are a tribe of Israel. People in Africa, well, they believe the people in Africa are and the Native Americans are from a tribe of Ephraim. And so in their minds, and you'll even hear Mormons say that at some point we'll hear other scriptures from all these other lost tribes, as if there's some secret groups of Israelites all over the place. It's a very interesting perspective. I think these are the things that a lot of non-members realize about Mormons, is they really do view themselves as modern day Jews even today. They feel like they're the real children of Israel.
That's why that's why you occasionally get the joke of Jews living on Mormon land. They're the Jewish Gentiles.
Yeah.
They do view themselves as the new Israelite kingdom.
Yeah.
I have noticed that it's a very kind of unique in that sense. It's kind of unique in that sense because Rastafarians view themselves the same way, and so do a lot of Afrocentric religions. Like not the Nation of Islam, because the Nation of Islam hates Jews, but the Hebrew Israelites. Sorry.
No, that's fine, and it's a very interesting. I eventually want to do a video about the Afrocentric movement, because it actually, you give somebody an inch, especially with discussions of Egypt and maybe the Kingdom of Kush, and then you have to give them every modern, every amazing ancient civilization. They'll claim to be the Greeks, they'll claim to be the Romans, they'll claim to be.
But it's the same thing. I mean, the same thing. I didn't know had been muted for a couple minutes, but the same thing is true for many groups, because any group that feels like they were ostracized for some reason or had to go through some kind of exodus, and the wording is always very similar.
Yeah,
there's always that identification with the ancient Jews. If you look at the civil rights movement of the 60s, or if you look at dang it, I just went blank.
At Mormons, at
when the Mormons left Nauvoo, they always refer to that as an exodus. They always do.
Exactly, and
but it's a reoccurring. I'm saying it's a reoccurring. Yeah, the Rastafarians are that way. It's a reoccurring theme. And there's elements of truth in all kinds of things. You know what I mean? Because every group, culture, whatever, has had a Genesis and Exodus kind of moment, whether it was because of their own doing or it was because the people around them were like, no, we want to do whatever, you know what I mean? It's a pretty, I forgot the name of the book, but there's a couple of documents that talk about this, but it pertains to all groups, not just religious ones.
Sure. Well, let's go into I think we've discussed the classical Mormon. Let's delve into the modern church, what the modern church believes.
Before we move on, I do kind of want to ask, because I'm not as familiar with Brigham Young. What exactly is a basic idea of what he did in his lifetime? Because I'm not as informed on Brigham Young as I am on Joseph.
You mean before he went to Utah?
Even during that.
Okay, so basically he was more or less a banker. Had a lot of ties to financiers. He's a very wealthy businessman around his area. He really liked Joseph Smith's. I believe he was a member of the 12 apostles. And the
original.
One of the things, and a lot of people kind of thought some of his beliefs were a little out there, even during Joseph Smith's days.
Yeah, wasn't he the one that encouraged the dark skin myth, the dark skin being a curse from God myth?
Yeah, and that's where the church pretty much stayed until 1970, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and Brigham Young had, he had some beliefs that Joseph Smith really wanted to stamp out. He had some very interesting beliefs about God. Particularly, he believed that Jesus Christ was Adam, and Adam was Jehovah. Because Mormons believe Jesus is Jehovah, and so his theory was Adam was once a man, and this follows a basic Mormon pattern, and it actually makes sense a little bit if you follow Mormon theology. But he felt like Adam was a man who screwed up and basically had to die for his sins, where we get into blood atonement. He had to die for his sins as a man, but before when he died as Adam, he became Jehovah for some reason,
And
and
then became
and then had to
Jesus.
come back and pay for his sins as Adam, as Jesus. That was one of his.
I can see. Okay, I can see where they could get that from, with the Bible. I could
Yeah.
see how that pattern could form. I don't condone it. I'm just saying I could see where that.
No. If you follow their ideas, how they're saying that they believe all men can be gods in some way, but they have to go through kind of like a test, right?
Yeah.
That's what they felt like. That's what Jehovah had to go through to become the God of today in their mind.
So Mormons are of the belief that basically God has to sacrifice himself to become better. That's
to be truly pure.
That's kind of odd because that's not really how I read the crucifixion.
But there's
it's very interesting too, considering that you believe that Jesus is the actual Son of God the Father, and God the Father does not rule the planet Earth in their mind. So they have some very interesting beliefs. You know, they're one of the few polytheistic Christian religions, I would say.
Well, okay, so this is
they're kind of going back to Zoroastrianism in some respects because I don't. This is where I kind of get into the belief in the collective unconscious that Jung talked about, because they have the practice of the holy underwear. There's only one other religion that does that, and that's the Zoroastrians, which are the other big monotheist cult that kind of have that singular God surrounded by a set of angels, surrounded by more sets of angels.
Yeah.
Eventually surrounded by demons.
Well, except for the holy underwear kind of thing, I from classical Judaism, I can see where they would have got some of these influences from, and I can also see where they would have got some of this stuff from, because in some regards, with the way classical Jews talk about God, it's the idea between persona and relatio, and there's a word that the Jews use that got translated into relatio, like three relationships, and that turned into persona. That got translated into three persons, but in the Jewish mind, it's three relationships, and so that's where the Catholics get the three persons and all that stuff. So that I can see where some of this comes from Jewish literature and from ancient Christian literature and blah 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 blah.
Well, I wouldn't even say they go that far, and I don't know if you watched my video, Jay, but a lot of the ideas that Joseph Smith believed and Brigham Young believed as well came from the Great Awakening. One of the more interesting things going on during the East Coast, like around the 1870s, was everybody was obsessed with the beliefs of the Egyptian. Everybody was obsessed with the beliefs of the Israelites. Everybody was obsessed with the belief of the early Christians, and because everybody wanted to revitalize, everybody was sick of the Quakers. Everybody was sick of the Catholics. In fact, being a Catholic was it was a bad thing. They had political parties dedicated to hating on the Catholics, and basically
that carried up until
a lot of new movements that
carried out. That hatred of the Catholic Church in a lot of ways carried up, because if you look at Kennedy's election,
Kennedy was actually it was controversial that he was a Catholic.
Yeah, so I mean, again, that I'm totally tracking with what you're saying. I mean, it's
sure, but I mean, one of the more interesting beliefs that the Mormons have is definitely not unique, and that is that that they believe that the Native Americans are a tribe of Israel. Now, the church now is very facetious about this, and they don't really like talking about it because there's absolutely nothing that they could do to prove that there were any members of a branch of the Israelites living in the Americas. I mean, there's been a spare Roman coin here and there, but other than that, I mean, there hasn't really been a lot of cultural exchange between the Americas.
It's basically the occasional fisherman washed up from the old world onto the new world every few centuries.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that is the most difficult thing for the church to stand by, and that's why the church nowadays talks about what they call a limited geography model, where they say this particular group of Israelites went in a very remote area of the Americas that hasn't been really excavated. But the problem that I have with that is the timelines that Joseph Smith was giving and the areas he was talking about were listed. He was talking about all these areas in Central America, Mexico, and the United States as being actual places where these huge, powerful Iron Age civilizations were existing. And that's my problem with it. Is like I hate to go back to Joseph Smith, but I mean you have to stand by your beliefs. And if that's not true, then you should probably question the rest of your beliefs too.
Well, okay, but again, remember what I was saying just a second ago? It's one of those, and it's true in evolution too. It's like things take on a life of their own, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to pick a religion, but let's just take, you know, like Harry Potter or whatever, you know, or Star Wars is the better one, right? The originals came out, and then it just kind of takes on a life of its own, and the fan base or whatever begins to then feed it and do all these things, and so it does. It's, you know, it mutates. It's the, you know, the genetic drifting, and it's true for everything. I mean, it's easier to see like in electronics because it's faster, but it's, you know, it happens in everything. So, you know.
Yeah, but I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. The point I was making is the belief that that the Jews were actually the descendants of the Native Americans was actually a belief that was circulating around the area since the early 1800s, and it's actually particularly damning because there's actually been publications talking about that connection, and so even some of the beliefs that the Mormons do stand by, even as loosely as they do today, is not unique. And there's a little bit of cherry picking here and there. You know, that's why they have the 12 apostles. You know, and they say they have a prophet, seer, president at the head of the church. And it really interesting. You know, and the modern church has some major issues that I don't really know if they'll be able to get past it, because so many people are starting to research some of the history. But strangely, some of the things that have been pushing members away has been views on social issues, their views on homosexuality, their views on feminism, right? Their views on, and, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, I feel like some religious organizations actually do need a form of women's rights or feminism or something, because the Mormon women don't really have any kind of power in the organization at all. It's actually kind of shocking.
See, and I think this is like I was kind of getting into it with Minty Fox about this, but like in classical Judaism, I mean, it's not feminism as we would think about feminism, but it empowered women had a lot of power, a lot more power than you would think for the time frame to do
Yeah.
certain things. And I don't, I'm not saying, if you have a belief that you shouldn't do certain things because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you should stand by that, but actually have reasons to back that. Like, I can economically say why doing certain things is dumb, but that's an economic answer. I'm not going to prevent you from doing that, But now some of the stuff, though, if you implement it, it mutates in a direction that you might not want it to go. It could go south really bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like when
Yeah.
feminism
No,
joined
I would agree.
atheism. When feminism joined atheism, it just went.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, we got about 5 minutes. Did you guys want to ask anything before we go?
Um,
Got it.
I'm trying to think.
We could talk about some of the things going on right now.
One of the things that well, what were you thinking in regards to that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead and ask.
Because I don't really have a question. I kind of want to entertain the topic of the conversion of the dead.
Okay. Yeah, I want to actually get into that because I felt like I probably should have gone into it a little bit more in depth. So basically, this is something that younger members of the church can do, men and women. I shouldn't say men or women, teenagers, basically. If you're over 12, you can do the baptism of the dead. And this is one of the main reasons why the church is so involved in genealogy, is mainly so that you could dig up old ancestors and baptism. And I don't know if you were there before, Egg or Jay, but basically Mormons believe that when you die, you go to a place called spirit hell and spirit paradise.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a good member, you go to spirit paradise, and if you're everybody else, you go to spirit hell. And spirit hell, or prison, they say, but they give it a little nicer ring, right? It's basically you're just kind of floating there as a spirit. And what baptism of the dead does is it allows for you to be converted as a spirit when you're dead. So you'll be approached by a nice spirit missionary group, and they'll tell you about the church. And of course, you're going to accept, right? Because you're in spirit prison, and you're going to want to go to spirit paradise, and therefore you'll eventually be a good member of the church when Jesus comes back and you're resurrected.
See, the Catholics have a thing like that too, or they did.
Purgatory.
Well, no. I was going to say the indulgences thing.
Yeah.
Yes, purgatory.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, after purgatory, but I'm saying, but there was when they instituted this kind of that redemption of the dead. That's also another common theme in some of the religious viewpoints. I think voodoo's got one of them.
Well, the main thing with baptism of the dead, and this is what really irritates people, a lot of people. Very obviously, if you're a convert to the church, you dig up all this genealogy of very devout members of whatever faith. And the church actually got into quite a bit of controversy with some Jewish Holocaust survivors.
Exactly.
Baptism into the dead. And basically the church, the way that they responded and say, oh, well, we actually went on the books and we went ahead and erased that baptism. So that's not a thing anymore. So don't worry about it. And I'm just kind of like, hey, it's just ridiculous.
If it's that fucking simple.
Well, that's kind of always been my problem with because unlike the Jews, or at least the hardcore Jews, is they are fanatical about not tampering with the text. even if the text is
Yeah.
wrong or right or whatever. They are nutso about it. You can't touch the letters. You know what I mean. They're nuts about it. It's like the robot now that's writing the Torah. It's not even considered kosher because it's not done with human hand. I mean, they're nutso about it, right?
Yeah, but
So I mean, I think I
mainly with
see.
yeah. So well, I mean, it's like they literally died for their faith, you know, and it was an extremely insane. But you know, to be honest with you, I almost thought it'd be more appropriate for them to say, hey, that's just what we believe. We just want them to go to heaven. You know,
Yeah.
and the way that the church handled it was pretty much just saying, oh no, we don't worry. That they handled it was more of like a PR firm rather than like a religion. You know, all they had to say was, "This is what we believe."
Yeah, if they legitimately believe it, why?
Well, but that's what I was saying though. It's like that was my problem with Mormonism is if you can go back and doctor the teachings and be like, well, we're just going to erase this bit about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
It's like, well, then what part can't be erased? That doesn't mean I'm going to throw stones at Mormons though. Okay, so
No. But that's not what this is about. But
no.
I think I'm going to end it here, guys.
Well, I have a question
God,
about.
thank you so much for coming. We're
Jay has a question.
Go ahead, Jay. We'll end off with that.
Well, I mean, it might be in your video, but I was going to say that have you what do you think about how the Mormon Americana, the way the Mormons behave, how it's trickled into our political system? Because
that's a very good point. The way that Mormons act and how they do everything has, and I would say mostly with the Republican Party, has really separated, kind of slinked in to the ideal Republican candidate, more or less. That's why nobody liked Donald Trump, because he didn't fit that like clean shaven,
yeah.
Not a beard, right? Real nice hair, very nice business casual suit. You're just going to the grocery store, you wear a suit, and their conservative politics also has a lot to do, so they're all Mormons pretty much are pro-Israel. All Mormons are pro-immigration, so they actually kind of contrast with Republicans on that, and a lot of Mormons are actually pro charity, but they would rather do it themselves. That's why they don't really believe in state-run charities. The church itself is a giant charity. But a lot of those ideas have actually seeped into the Republican Party. And they are actually very influential with Republican politics. Maybe not now. I think maybe Trump has changed that in a lot of ways. He's very crude. He's not politically correct, and that's exactly what Mormons are. Mormons are the most politically correct people that you've ever met in your entire life. If they offend you in any kind of way, they will apologize from here to the moon.
Well, kind of what I was getting at is like Penn Jillette pointed out how the perfect Boy Scout model became. I mean, the perfect Mormon kind of became the perfect Boy Scout. That's what I'm meaning. And I don't. In some ways, I don't necessarily think it's bad, but in other ways, I kind of do. You know what I mean? It's just like I do think.
And it's interesting you mentioned Boy Scouts because they are actually one of the primary financiers of the organization. And
now they are.
Yeah.
See, when I was a kid, they weren't.
Yeah, no, everybody was, but now they are. And the thing that's crazy about it is when you're a certain age, you're automatically a Cub Scout and you're automatically a Boy Scout. And in fact, the church has strict dress code when you go to church. But if you wear a suit, a Scout uniform, it's perfectly acceptable. So they have a lot of influence over the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, that's why a lot of atheists can't stand it, because that's when the anti-gay, a lot of the stuff came in.
Yeah.
Not saying it wasn't always there, it just wasn't open. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I'd like to go over this some more, but I don't want to keep you guys. But thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate the discussion.
I would like to
Next
hear
week,
more. I'd like to hear more. You know what I mean? Because I find it fascinating
yeah,
of the parallels. But again, I'm coming from it from a very different viewpoint. You know, because the whole
sure.
I used to be a monk, so it's like I could see like, oh, I know what scriptures they're talking about and where that could have been lifted. But I
Sure.
also see this in other groups, not just religious. I mean, there's this weird pattern that forms with all kinds of groups, and it was like, oh, they're about to experience X, Y, and Z. Oh, sure enough, there they go.
Yeah, that's why there's that model of civilization. It's the German model, this Germanic model.
Like
So,
Kant, like
chaos.
Kant or something.
No. It's chaos. Verwirrung. Fuck it. Give me a second.
But anyway, man, if you want to go, that's cool. I mean, but I would love to hear more, because when I read the Book of Mormon, I mean, I didn't make it all the way through just because it was like, it just kind of made me
Confusing.
sick to my stomach to read it. No, I understood it, but it just made me sick to my stomach. Like, I was like, wow, this is nowhere. Like, no, it's not. It doesn't line up with the Jewish texts at all. And I was just like,
Sure.
I can't.
No, and to be honest with you, if let's say that the events actually took place, a Book of Mormon would be fascinating, because you would hear about the actual Jewish beliefs in 500 BC before Jesus came, and you would see how the belief system changed from the older belief. So you would see. It would just be amazing, because it would be a whole different history of the Jews. And not only that, but I mean, just imagine us hearing the account of the Jews crossing the ocean, which it would be just an amazing feat, and just uh, interacting with this new environment. It would be a fascinating tale. And then when you're reading it, you're just stupefied how stupid a lot of the things that they're talking about. They're talking about Christianity before Christ came. They're talking about there's entire sections of the Book of Mormon that are straight up lifted from the King James version of the Bible. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh,
You know.
what's the
But you are going to put the caveat, though. Unlike other religious beliefs, though, do you see them as a threat, or do you see them as just like, okay, they're weird, let them do their thing, leave them alone? You know what I mean?
They're a threat. They're a threat if you're. No, I don't see them as a threat. In fact, I feel like they're a dying religion. They're antiquated. They're the amount of members that have been deconverting is just staggering. And honestly, one of the biggest reasons is the fact that church members
Internet.
have becoming more and more liberal, and the church can't really keep up with it.
Because I remember in the 50s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? Mormons were well known for being singing groups. I mean, I know that sounds really kind of a little thing, but like Donnie and Marie Osmond were a thing in my lifetime. I remember that. I remember it was like, wow, these seem like really decent people. And they were held up as like, oh, decent folk. And nobody talked about, like, nobody looked deeper into it. They were just like, wow,
So they're sort of like they're sort of like the Scientologists. Once the fastest growing religion in the world, now the fastest shrinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is a major issue, because people are becoming less religious. They're not. I don't think people are necessarily turning away from theism, but they're definitely becoming less religious. And
I would say
Mormon,
less dogmatic.
exactly.
Well,
They're very dogmatic.
Well, okay. I don't know if I would say that because remember me being an anarchist, I'm looking at it differently. Now I see more of that dogmatism coming out in the political realm or in the earthly realm versus the spiritual realm. You know what I mean? Because it's like if you're chasing
like
God, right?
with the
And
with
you're
the
fixing
rise.
yourself versus
Yeah, but
and
I mean, well, besides that, I mean, we could talk about
yeah,
that all day.
yeah.
I feel, I'd like to continue this, but I'm gonna have to unfortunately leave. But
No, that's okay. But I mean, we could
no,
talk some other
I
time.
feel
That'd be
like
good.
we really should
Okay.
continue this discussion. And my video on the Jehovah's Witnesses is going to come out on Sunday.
Ooh.
And that one will be a doozy. And
I can't wait to hear that one.
yeah,
Well,
I'm just from my research, I am just fascinated with this because they have some amazing beliefs, very unique.
yeah, but again, I mean, there's certain religious beliefs or political beliefs that I am personally am not threatened by. I don't, you know what I mean? They
No,
don't care.
I'm definitely not threatened by Jehovah's Witnesses
Yeah,
beliefs. In
but
fact,
there's other beliefs that it was like, okay, no, mm-mm.
yeah.
But
No,
anyway, but yeah, we could
but
talk some other time.
basically, so next Sunday, maybe Saturday, the video will drop. But I'll do another discussion next Sunday, and we'll go over the Jehovah's Witnesses. In the future, I'd like to eventually have somebody who's an adherent of the religion kind of listen in, because it's always nice to hear.
What their
From somebody who
perspectives are.
actually believes it.
Yeah.
It's because I don't like the concept of an echo chamber. I'd rather hear from everybody's perspective, even if they're brainwashed. It's still nice.
Well, but this is why, like, I hate to say this, like, kudos to me, but it's like, remember, like, I was a monk for a long time, so
Yeah.
I do know where a lot of this stuff comes from, and that's why, like, I can be nice or I can be hard depending on how you want me to be, but it's like I can show empathy to these groups. I do get what they were trying to do or what they, the direction they were going in, but I also can see it's like, nope, this is like I can pick out the point of like, nope, this part right here is
Yeah.
where they started going south,
Yeah.
So,
But anyways, gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion. I look forward to possibly seeing both of you guys next week.
okay, I'll do my very best.
And this is.
I said I'll do my very best. I mean, school's going to be starting soon, so it's like things are going to get weird again.
Well, anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go ahead and end from there. And like I said, thank you so much for coming on, guys. I appreciate it. And have a great evening.
You too. See ya.